The Georgia evening stretched out before her, bathed in the honey glow of a sinking sun. Lieutenant General Adrienne Blake guided the silver rental sedan along the familiar Tulane back road, the kind that curved lazily through farmland and pine stands. She'd taken this route as a teenager countless times, back when she was just Addie Blake, the girl who shot hoops behind the high school gym and climbed the old oak tree in her mother's yard. Today, her errand was simple: pick up her niece. Autumn's cap and gown for tomorrow's graduation. The garment rested neatly on the passenger seat, a folded promise of celebration to come. Her casual jeans and crisp white blouse were a far cry from the starched dress blues that had accompanied her most public moments. But even in civilian clothes, she carried herself with the quiet precision that came from nearly 3 decades of service. Her hands rested lightly on the wheel at 10 and 2, her eyes scanning the road ahead and the mirrors without conscious effort. Afghanistan, Iraq, the Horn of Africa, those landscapes still lived in her bones. She had commanded troops in firefights, coordinated evacuations under mortar fire, and briefed presidents in the Situation Room. Discipline wasn't something she wore like a uniform. It was her. 2 miles back, a black and white cruiser idle by the edge of a soybean field, hidden just enough to seem casual. Inside sat Officer Ray Mitchum, a thick-necked man with graying hair and a permanent scowl etched into his sun-baked face. Years on the Ashwood police force had taught him to lessons: who held the real power in town, and how to use his badge to remind others of it. His partner, Officer Logan Sharp, younger by 20 years and only 18 months out of the academy, kept his gaze forward. He'd learned quickly that Mitchum liked to narrate his own version of events, and it was easier and safer not to question it. Mitchum spotted the sedan before the plate was fully visible. Silver rental, he said, chewing the words as if tasting them, driven by a black female. Looked like our Bolo. The be on the lookout call had been vague. Possible stolen vehicle, no confirmed plate. It was enough for Mitchum. Sharp glanced at the dash cam, its steady blinker reminder that their every move could be recorded. You sure, Ray, could just be someone visiting? Mitchum's smirk spread slowly. Then they won't mind a quick chat. Adrienne noticed the cruiser pull out and settle behind her. The gap closed until she could see the glint of sun off the push bar in her rearview mirror. She glanced at her speedometer, dead on the limit. Still, the cruiser stayed glued to her, a predator pacing its prey. When the blue lights snapped on, they pierced the calm like tracer rounds in the dark. She eased onto the gravel shoulder, hazard lights blinking, and rolled down her window. Both hands stayed on the wheel in plain sight, not because she was guilty, but because she knew the rules of survival when uniforms approached. Mitchum strode up first, heavy steps grinding the gravel. Evening, he said, voice dripping with the kind of familiarity that wasn't friendly. Gonna need you to step out of the vehicle, ma'am. Sharp lingered a few feet back, eyes flicking between Adrienne and his partner. May I ask why, officer? Her voice was calm, clipped. Mitchum tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he didn't care to solve. Got a report of a stolen vehicle matching this description. Silver sedan, driven by. He let the pause hang in the air. Before finishing, a black female. Adrienne's pulse stayed steady, but inside, a familiar steel coiled tight. This is a rental. I have the paperwork and my ID right here. General Oprah, Mitchum said suddenly, turning to Sharp. With a grin, ain't that something? She thinks she's special. Adrienne met his eyes without flinching. Lieutenant General Adrienne Blake, United States Army, and yes, I am special, in the sense that I've served my country for 27 years. My documents will confirm that. Mitchum's smirk didn't fade. Step out of the car. Now. The air thickened between them. Adrienne moved slowly, each motion deliberate, aware of Sharp's stiff posture and Mitchum's hand hovering near his holster. The sun was nearly gone, shadows lengthening across the road. Every step toward compliance felt like walking deeper into a place she'd been before, hostile ground where the wrong move could cost everything. And as she rose from the driver's seat, she saw it in Sharp's eyes, the flicker of doubt, the hint that he knew this wasn't about the law at all. The gravel crunched under Adrienne's boots as she stepped out, the late evening air carrying the damp scent of pine and distant rain. The blue lights behind her pulsed against the trees, throwing jagged shadows across the roadside like the strobe of a war zone flare. It wasn't lost on her how quickly the quiet Georgia back road had transformed into a hostile perimeter, and she knew the man standing in front of her was intent on making it feel like one. Mitchum sized her up in silence, his gaze lingering not on her face but on her shoulders, her posture, the way she moved. Soldiers knew the look, the predator's assessment. Sharp kept his place by the cruiser's fender, hands clasped in front of him, his expression betraying an unease he was trying to mask. "Turn around," Mitchum ordered, the words flat, but carrying that underlying satisfaction of a man who enjoyed the sound of his own authority. Adrienne didn't move yet. "You've seen my identification," she said, keeping her voice even. "It matches the rental paperwork. There's no cause for a turn round." The second command was sharper, the kind that dared you to refuse. Her training told her to de-escalate, to minimize risk. But another part of her, the part forged in 1,000 moments of standing ground against people who believed they had absolute power, bristled. She rotated slowly, eyes scanning the tree line, the road behind them. Every detail she could commit to memory. Cold metal closed around her wrists. The click of the handcuffs was louder than it should have been, echoing off the quiet fields. Mitchum tugged her arms back just a fraction harder than necessary, leaning close enough for her to smell stale coffee and chewing tobacco. "You're under investigation for possession of a stolen vehicle," he said, low enough that Sharp couldn't quite hear every word. "Big mistake combing through here thinking your stars mean something to me." Adrienne didn't flinch, but she felt her jaw tighten. "Those stars," she said quietly, "are why you're not already making the biggest mistake of your life." From somewhere beyond the shoulder, a soft rustle caught her ear. Mitchum's head turned at the same moment. A figure stood just beyond the ditch, partially hidden by the tree line. A young man, phone in hand, its screen glowing like a beacon. "Hey," Mitchum barked, his voice suddenly louder, sharper. "What the hell are you doing? Just walking home," the young man replied, though his voice trembled. Sharp shifted, but Mitchum was already moving toward the ditch, his boots splashing in the shallow runoff. "Hand it over," he snapped. "It's my right to film," the man said, gripping the phone tighter. Adrienne's gut told her exactly how this would end before it happened. Mitchum snatched the phone, dropped it to the asphalt, and drove his heel into it with a sickening crack. "Oops," Mitchum said, straightening, the ghost of a grin on his face. "Guess you'll have to remember it the old-fashioned way." The kid's eyes found Adrienne's across the dimming space. For a split second, there was an unspoken exchange. His fear met her resolve. "Remember this," she gave the faintest nod. Mitchum turned back, satisfied, and motioned Sharp to bring the cruiser. Adrienne allowed herself to be guided into the back seat, the cuffs biting into her skin. She sat upright, unbroken, even as the door shut with a heavy thunk. In the darkness of the rear cabin, she shifted her wrist just enough to tap the edge of her smartwatch. No ordinary signal. This one carried an encrypted burst straight to the Pentagon, flagged with a code black. Somewhere in a secure room in Washington. Alarms would be going off, screens lighting up with her name and location. Mitchum had no idea what button she'd just pressed. He thought this was a routine show of dominance, a forgettable exercise of small-town power. But Adrienne knew better. The call she just sent would bring people who did not forget, did not forgive, and did not take lightly the humiliation of one of their own outside. The cruiser pulled away from the gravel shoulder, its lights still, flashing against the Georgia night. The road ahead was empty, but Adrienne could feel the storm gathering far beyond Ashwood's borders. A storm that would sweep right back down this very road and bury the men who thought they'd won tonight. The cruiser's interior smelled faintly of vinyl, sweat, and the lingering sharpness of disinfectant. Adrienne sat in the back, the cuffs biting into her wrists with every subtle shift of the vehicle. The divider's wire mesh caught slivers of light from passing farmhouses, fracturing them into jagged shapes across her face. Mitchum drove with one hand draped lazily over the wheel, the other tapping a slow rhythm against his thigh. Sharp sat stiffly in the passenger seat, eyes fixed on the road, but shoulders tight, as though every mile they traveled wound an invisible coil inside him. The radio crackled now and then with mundane dispatch chatter, a loose cow on County Road 14, a noise complaint by the rail yard. The ordinary backdrop made Adrienne's own situation feel almost surreal. In another life, she'd been in armored convoys moving through Afghan valleys, scanning for IEDs, making tactical calls that meant life or death. Now, she was a prisoner in her own hometown, ferried under the hum of a siren that wasn't even on. As if Mitchum didn't need the noise to make his authority felt. At one point, Mitchum caught her gaze in the rearview mirror. "You'll get your phone call when we're good and ready," he said, without her asking. His voice was smug, but there was something else buried in it, an undercurrent of satisfaction. As though this wasn't chance but a long-planned play, Sharp's eyes flickered sideways toward his partner. "Ray, you sure we're processing her here? Seems like the kind of thing the chief might want a heads up on first." Mitchum's jaw tightened. "The chief will hear about it when it's already done. That way, there's nothing for her to question." The words landed in Adrienne's mind like drop pins on a map. Already done. No questions. This wasn't procedure. This was a move in a game she hadn't been told she was playing. The street lamps thinned as they crossed into the older part of town, where buildings sagged like tired sentinels, and storefronts bore faded hand-painted signs. The police station loomed at the far end, its pale brick facade lit from below by stark floodlights. Inside, a handful of officers glanced up as Mitchum marched her in. Some smirked. Others looked away too quickly. She recognized the type. People who'd seen lines cross before and decided silence was safer. Name. The desk sergeant, Sandy Gibson, didn't even look up from her keyboard. Blake, Adrienne. Suspected vehicle theft, resisting arrest. Mitchum's tone was brisk, rehearsed. Adrienne spoke up, her voice calm, but carrying no resistance. "I complied fully. The charges are baseless." Gibson's eyes flickered toward her, but she didn't stop typing. Noted. Mitchum took her through the motions with deliberate slowness. Fingerprints, mugshot, inventory of personal effects. The camera flash lit the processing room in harsh white bursts, each one burning the moment into record like a battlefield flare. Sharp lingered by the doorway, his face pale. At one point, when Mitchum stepped away to speak to another officer, Sharp's eyes found hers. He looked like he wanted to say something, but his lips pressed into a thin line instead. The holding cell was small, concrete floored, with a bench bolted to the wall. A single barred window high above the door emitted a narrow shaft of light from the hall. Adrienne sat, her back straight, her breathing even. She'd learned in military survival school that sometimes the most powerful act in captivity was to refuse to shrink. Across the hall, Mitchum's voice carried from the break room. "That's what happens when folks think they're too good for the law," he was saying, the cadence of his words almost performative. "Send a message, and they remember it." Her eyes narrowed. This wasn't just an abuse of power. This was theater, staged for an audience, and Adrienne had the sinking sense that the audience extended far beyond this small town station, somewhere hundreds of miles away. Her code black alert would have reached the Pentagon by now. She pictured the secure comms room, the flashing screen, the shift from routine to emergency. She pictured General Harlan Reyes reading her name and location. The tightening of his jaw as he made the first calls. Mitchum thought he'd just pulled over a woman on a back road, but Adrienne knew better. She wasn't just anyone. And when the storm came for him, it wouldn't come from Ashwood. It would come from the highest levels of the very system he thought he controlled. And sitting in that dim, bleach-scented cell, she allowed herself the smallest flicker of satisfaction. He had no idea it was already on its way. The hours in the cell stretched like drawn wire. The hum of the overhead light was constant, a low electric whine that made it hard to track time. Adrienne sat on the cold bench, her back against the wall, hands resting loosely in her lap, every muscle controlled. She could hear the station breathing, the shuffle of boots on linoleum, the clink of coffee mugs, the occasional burst of laughter from the break room. Somewhere a radio played an old blues tune, slow and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. She thought of Autumn's cap and gown, still folded on the front seat of the rental car. She thought of her sister Tanya, waiting for her to return before dark, and she thought of the signal she'd sent from her watch, a silent pulse already burning its way through encrypted channels. Toward Washington, D.C., to states away, the Pentagon's emergency communication center was anything but calm. The code black alert had hit Colonel Sarah Martinez's console like a flare in the night sky. She'd read the name twice to be sure. Lieutenant General Adrienne Blake, immediate danger. Martinez didn't hesitate. Within minutes, General Harlan Reyes was pulled from a meeting. The classified situation report placed directly into his hands. Reyes remembered Afghanistan, remembered the October morning Adrienne had dragged a wounded major out from under a burning Humvee. He didn't need convincing. "Prep a jet," he said to his aide. "We're wheels up in 10. Orders fanned out from there. calls to federal liaisons, discreet pings to intelligence contacts, quiet queries into Ashwood's police force. Back in the station, Mitchum was in his element. He leaned against the break room counter, regaling a small knot of officers with his version of events. "You should have seen her face," he said, pouring himself more coffee. "Pulled that I'm a general card like it meant something. I told her, not out here, it doesn't." His audience chuckled, but not all of them were smiling. Officer Nia Tucker sat at the edge of the group, listening without comment. She'd been on the force less than a year, and already she'd learned to keep her head down around Mitchum. But something about the woman in the cell didn't sit right with her. The poise, the quiet strength, and those tattoos, Ranger tab, Special Forces crest. Not the kind you picked up on a whim. When Mitchum stepped away to answer a phone call, Nia made her move. She walked casually down the hall, stopping by the holding cell as if to check the lock. Adrienne looked up, meeting her eyes. There was no plea there, no desperation, just a steady, assessing gaze. "You really a general?" Nia asked quietly, glancing over her shoulder. Adrienne didn't blink. "Yes, and that man out there is making the mistake of his career." Nia hesitated, then walked on. But the seed had been planted. By now, the storm outside the station was gathering. In Atlanta, a small newsroom was buzzing after a tip from a young man named Darnell Washington. His phone had been destroyed, but his friend Marcus had recovered. The footage from the cloud, grainy, but clear enough to show a calm, compliant black woman being handcuffed by two white officers. Marcus had already pushed it to Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. The hashtag was simple, #LadyInCuffs. Within hours, it was trending. Local news vans began converging on Ashwood, their antennas rising into the night sky like silver stalks. Reporters called the station for comment, were stonewalled. Protesters, alerted by social media, started gathering in the square outside. Mitchum didn't notice. He was too busy basking in the glow of his own story, convinced the town was behind him. Sharp noticed. He'd seen the glint in Adrienne's eye when Mitchum cuffed her. The way she'd carried herself into the cruiser like she wasn't the one under arrest. It was starting to dawn on him that this wasn't going to disappear quietly, and Adrienne? She sat in the dim light of her cell, listening to the shifting currents in the station. Voices had changed, sharper, quicker. A phone rang twice before being picked up. The air felt different. The cavalry was coming. She closed her eyes, drawing a slow breath, and thought of something her first commanding officer had told her years ago, in battle. The moment before contact is the quietest and the most dangerous. In Ashwood that night, the quiet was almost over. The quiet in the station fractured like glass under pressure. The phones rang more often now, the tone of the voices answering them sharper, clip, as if trying to contain something that was already slipping beyond control. Adrienne could feel it through the walls, the way a soldier senses shifting momentum on a battlefield, the invisible tide before it hit shore. A faint metallic rattle at the cell door drew her attention. Officer Nia Tucker stood there again, one hand resting on the bars, her posture tense but resolute. She glanced toward the hallway to make sure they were alone before speaking. "They're saying you're in here for a stolen car," Nia whispered, her voice low and deliberate. "But I saw your paperwork. Everything checked out." Adrienne met her eyes. "You know this isn't about a car." Nia swallowed, her throat bobbing. "I think it's about making a point. I've heard Mitchum talk before about putting people in their place." Before Adrienne could respond, Mitchum's voice boomed down the corridor. "Tucker, break room. Now." Nia straightened, masking her expression, and walked away without looking back. Adrienne listened as Mitchum launched into another performance. For the gathered officers, his version of events, peppered with jabs about uppity people and fancy titles. It was so brazen, so unguarded, that she wondered if he even believed consequences were possible in a place like Ashwood. But consequences were coming, miles away, in the belly of a military transport jet cutting through the night sky toward Georgia. General Harlan Reyes leaned over a secure tablet. On the screen, Major Owen Marks was feeding him real-time intel from the Pentagon Cyber Operations Division. Mitchum's got online ties to an extremist militia calling themselves Iron Oak. Marks reported, his voice steady but urgent. Forum posts, encrypted messages, all pointing to him as a contact in Ashwood. He's been bragging for weeks about an upcoming example that would make headlines. Reyes' jaw tightened. He knew she was coming. "Yes, sir," Marks confirmed. "We've got geotagged searches for her name. her family, even the graduation schedule for her niece. Reyes sat back, the truth settling over him like a storm front. This wasn't just a bad stop, it was an ambush. Back in Ashwood, Sharp stepped outside for air. The square in front of the station was no longer quiet. A crowd had formed, holding signs, some with cell phones raised to live stream. Local news crews threaded through the gathering, cables sneaking across the pavement. Sharp lit a cigarette. With trembling hands, the glow briefly lighting the unease in his eyes. He thought about the look Adrienne had given him during the stop, not fear, but a kind of pity, as if she knew exactly who he was and what it would cost him to change. He exhaled smoke and glanced at the crowd again. Something told him that if he stayed silent much longer, he'd be swallowed whole by whatever Mitchum had started inside. Mitchum hung up a call and strode toward the holding cells, keys jangling. He stopped in front of Adrienne's cell. His grin slow and deliberate. "Hope you're comfortable, General. Might be here a while." Adrienne rose to her feet, not closing the distance, but making sure she stood level with him. "Comfort's never been my priority," she said evenly. "Survival has, and you've already lost that game." He laughed, a short, dismissive sound, but something in her voice made his eyes flicker. Just for an instant dot, because even Mitchum, in his insulated little world of small-town authority, could feel it. The walls were closing in. He just didn't know yet that they were coming from Washington, and they were moving fast. And somewhere above the dark Georgia countryside, the roar of incoming engines signaled that his time was running out. The roar of engines over the Georgia countryside was faint at first, swallowed by the hum of crickets and the distant bark of a dog. Inside the Ashwood police station, no one seemed to notice except Adrienne, her ears, trained by years of listening for the pitch of helicopters and transport planes in hostile terrain, caught the sound immediately. It wasn't local, and it was getting closer. She remained seated on the bench in her cell, spine straight, eyes fixed on the narrow, barred window above. The faint vibration in the walls told her what Mitchum didn't know. The Pentagon wasn't sending a polite inquiry. They were coming in hot dot down the hall. The chief's office door slammed open. Chief Barbara Stroud emerged, her phone still in her hand, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. She moved fast, heels clicking against the tile, muttering into the receiver. "No, they can't just—" "Yes, I understand, but listen, we'll handle it our way." She stopped short when she saw Nia Tucker lingering near the holding cells. "Tucker, in my office. Now." Nia hesitated, eyes darting toward Adrienne's cell before obeying. The brief flicker of contact between them was enough for Adrienne to know. Nia had decided which side she was on, and it wasn't Mitchum's. Outside, the distant engines grew louder. They weren't helicopters, they were jet turbines, and multiple vehicles could now be heard on the road leading to the station. Mitchum, oblivious to the encroaching storm, was in the break room, his boots propped on a chair, sipping coffee, and smirking like the king of a very small kingdom. Sharp stood by the front desk, the unease in his posture making him look like he might bolt. Then the first black SUV appeared in the station parking lot, followed by two more, all with government plates. The crowd outside, now larger, angrier, and emboldened by the live streamers in their midst, erupted into a murmur that quickly built into shouts. Reporters surged forward, cameras snapping. The station doors burst open, and in walked General Harlan Reyes, flanked by two uniformed military police and a pair of grim-faced federal agents. The air in the room shifted instantly. Gone was the lazy small-town authority, replaced by the clipped, deliberate energy of people who dealt in decisive action. "Where is she?" Reyes' voice carried like a command in a war zone. Stroud tried to insert herself between them. "General Reyes, this is a local matter. Not anymore." Reyes cut her off, eyes like steel. "You have one of my officers in custody without cause. Release her, now." Mitchum finally appeared in the doorway, confusion giving way to hostility. "She's under investigation. We've got procedure here. You have a federal problem." One of the agents interrupted, stepping forward and flashing credentials. "And unless you want that problem to become an arrest warrant with your name on it, you'll unlock that cell." For a beat, no one moved. Then the sound of keys jingled broke the silence. Sharp, not Mitchum, stepped forward, his face pale, but set, without looking at his partner. He unlocked the cell and swung the door open. Adrienne stepped out slowly, every movement deliberate. The agents flanked her instantly, but she raised a hand. "I can walk on my own." Her gaze slid past Reyes to Mitchum, holding him for one long, unblinking moment. "This isn't over," Mitchum muttered. "You're right," Adrienne said, her voice calm, but edged with steel. "It's just beginning." As she walked out into the night, the crowd erupted, a mix of cheers, shouts, and camera flashes lighting the darkness. The black SUV sidled at the curb, doors open, ready to take her away. Over the noise, she caught the faint hum of a news anchor's voice. From someone's live stream. "Breaking tonight. The woman wrongfully arrested in Ashwood is confirmed to be a high-ranking Army general. Federal officials have arrived on scene." Inside the station, Mitchum tried to rally, barking orders at the other officers, but the sound of the engines as the convoy pulled away seemed to swallow him whole. He didn't yet know that the footage recovered from Darnell's phone had already hit national news, or that federal investigators were, at that very moment, unsealing warrants tied to his online militia ties. Adrienne sat in the back of the lead SUV, the station shrinking behind her. She didn't smile, but there was a current of quiet resolve in her eyes. This was no victory lap. It was the opening salvo in a much bigger war. The people who'd sent Mitchum after her were still out there, and they would not go quietly. And as the convoy merged onto the highway toward the airfield, the night around Ashwood seemed to tighten, the way the air feels before a storm breaks. A storm that, for Mitchum and everyone tied to him, would tear away the illusion of safety they had built and leave nothing standing.